What if the moment everyone has been waiting for already happened? Not in some dramatic Hollywood way, with lights in the sky and speeches at the United Nations, not with ships over cities or messages spelled across the moon. Just a quiet night in 1977, a lonely radio telescope pointed at the constellation Sagittarius. A thin whisper at one very specific frequency, and then a human hand circling 6 characters on a printout and writing one small word in the margin. Wow. In this story, we're not talking about a theory that might happen one day. We're talking about the possibility that it already did. Because if you click on a video called something like, "We missed our first message from aliens," you're not here for comfort. You're here to entertain the idea that we had our chance, and we let it slide into the filing cabinet of unsolved mysteries and moved on. So tonight, let's rewind to that moment. To a world before smartphones and social media, when searching the sky meant giant dishes in empty fields. To an observatory in Ohio called Big Ear, scanning the heavens one thin slice at a time. The job of Big Ear was simple in theory. Look for anything that doesn't sound like the universe talking to itself. Most of the cosmos sounds like static. Cosmic microwave background, natural radio emissions from gas clouds and stars, random bursts of noise from our own technology. But there's a special part of the dial that astronomers have always treated with a bit of reverence, around 1420 megahertz. That's the frequency of the hydrogen line, the radio signature of neutral hydrogen, the most common element in the universe. If you were a civilization trying to pick a universal channel everyone could agree on, you'd probably look there first. It's like the cosmic equivalent of saying, "Meet me at the main square of town." So when Big Ear was tuned near that frequency in August 1977, it wasn't just eavesdropping randomly. It was listening at what many scientists quietly considered a plausible calling frequency, a place where an intentional signal might hide. Most nights, nothing happened. The telescope rotated with the Earth, the computer printed lines of characters, and the data went into stacks. Until one night, the pattern changed. On August 15th, a volunteer named Jerry Eman was reviewing the latest printout. Each column of characters represented signal strength at a given frequency over time. Most of the page was dull. Ones, twos, blank spaces, the universe mumbling to itself. And then there it was, 6EQJ5, a spike, rising and falling over about 72 seconds, far above the normal background noise. Locked very close to that hydrogen line frequency, it didn't look like any of the usual kinds of interference. It didn't look like anything anyone had seen on that machine before. So Eamon did what any human with a pen and a spine full of static would do. He circled those 6 characters and wrote one word. Wow. That's how the wow signal got its name. Not from a committee, not from a press conference, but from an honest, startled reaction in the margin of a printout. What followed was not what you'd expect if this were a movie. No emergency meetings at midnight. No flashing headlines saying, "We are not alone." Just careful, methodical science. They pointed other telescopes at the same patch of sky. They listened for repeats. They checked for Earth-based interference. Nothing, no follow-up signal, no obvious natural explanation, no clear repeat. The wow signal became something awkward, too clean and too narrow to dismiss easily, too lonely and unrepeatable to declare contact with confidence. So it settled into a strange category, unexplained. And for nearly half a century, that's where it sat. Officially, we don't know what it was. Could have been something natural. Could have been interference. Unofficially, people kept staring at those 6 characters, at that small circle and the word wow, and wondering, what if that was a message? Not just a random tone, not just a flare of nature, but a structured hello compressed into 72 seconds. And we never answered. Tonight, we're going to walk into that possibility. We're going to look at the wow signal as if it really was a message, one that came with its own instructions on how to talk back. We're going to ask why no one replied, whether that was a mistake or the only sane choice a young civilization could make in a very old and very dark universe. And by the time we reach the end, you might find yourself facing a quiet, uncomfortable thought. Maybe we didn't miss our first message from aliens. Maybe we heard it, understood just enough to be afraid, and deliberately chose to say nothing. If you're listening to this at some unreasonable hour, settle in. Because the story of the wow signal is not just about what came from the sky, it's about what we decided down here. Chapter 2. The Night of the Wow Signal. To understand why that little wow still whispers through our culture, you have to see how Big Ear listened. This wasn't a telescope that pointed and stared at one star like a camera. Big Ear was more like a giant ear fixed in place, letting the rotation of the Earth sweep the sky past it. Imagine a beam, thin, tall, and very narrow, fixed on the sky. As our planet turns, different patches of space slide through that beam, like frames in a slow movie. Any given point in the sky only spends about 72 seconds inside that main lobe of the telescope's beam, 36 seconds rising in strength as it moves into the center, 36 seconds falling as it drifts out. If something out there were transmitting continuously, you'd expect the recorded signal to follow that pattern, a smooth, symmetrical rise and fall over that window. If something brief happened, an impulsive burst, it might slide through even faster. Now overlay this with how Big Ear recorded data. Every 10 seconds, the system measured how strong the signal was at a certain frequency channel. It turned that strength into a character, 1 to 9 for modest bumps above the noise, AZ for much stronger ones. Those characters printed on long sheets of paper, columns for different frequencies, rows for time. Most of the time, it looked like this: 1 to 1, 211, A1, 2-1. Little flickers, nothing dramatic. And then, on August 15th, at one frequency near 14 to 20 MHz, the pattern changed. 6 E Q U J 5. For 6 consecutive 10-second intervals, the signal rose and fell, far stronger than the usual background. 6 samples, roughly 72 seconds, exactly the length Big Ear would see a fixed point source as the Earth rotated. From a purely instrumental point of view, this was almost the ideal shape you'd expect if a distant transmitter was just sitting there, broadcasting steadily as our moving beam swept across it. Not a random burst, not a click or a glitch. A clean, narrowband tone rising and falling with the telescope's motion. The frequency very close to the hydrogen line. Hydrogen is everywhere. It's the simplest element, the most common. The 21-centimeter line associated with neutral hydrogen has long been proposed as a natural hailing channel. If you wanted to send a message that says, We know what this universe is made of, and we know you do too. That's where you'd aim. So in one sense, the wow signal checked all the classic boxes of a potential artificial signal. Narrowband, concentrated at a specific frequency. Stable, no obvious sweeping or drift like a local aircraft might produce. Right place on the dial, near the hydrogen line. Right shape in time, matching the telescope's beam pattern. But there was a problem. A big one. It never came back. After Amon's startled circle, and wow, astronomers did what they're trained to do, verify. They pointed Big Ear back at the same region. Nothing. Years later, other telescopes tried. Still nothing. In a way, the wow signal felt like a phone that rang once, loudly, and then never rang again. What do you do with that? If it repeats, you can study it. Measure the frequency precisely. Watch for patterns in how it turns on and off. Try to see if it's modulated, if there's information riding on the carrier like a radio station. With one burst, you're left with a snapshot, 6 characters, a rough shape in time, a direction on the sky that isn't even pinpoint precise, just a beam passing through part of the constellation Sagittarius near the dense region toward the center of our galaxy. You can't point to a specific star and say, it came from there. You can only say, somewhere in this patch. So science did what science has to do when the evidence is thin. It held back. Proposed explanations began to stack up. Some kind of natural astrophysical event, a rare flare from a hydrogen source, faint interference from Earth that just happened to line up, or the most dramatic, an artificial signal, perhaps from a distant civilization. Everyone agreed on one thing. It was interesting. But interesting is not the same as we are not alone. You need repetition for that. You need patterns you can study, rules you can test. So officially, the wow signal became that frustrating category. Not noise, not confirmed signal, just unexplained. Time moved on. Big Ear was dismantled. New, more sensitive arrays came online. We pointed them at exoplanets, at fast radio bursts, at galaxies billions of light years away. And yet, in the background, those 6 characters stayed lodged in the collective imagination. 6 EQUJ5. What if it wasn't just a tone? What if the very thing astronomers treated as a simple intensity label was trying to tell us more? After all, if you wanted to talk to a young technological species, what would you send first? A poem, a picture, a long speech in an unknown language? Or would you send something simpler, a handshake, a protocol, a set of instructions that says, here's how to check that this message is real, here's how to answer, here's where to aim your reply? Some people began to look at those 6 characters, not just as signal strengths, but as numbers, as symbols, and wonder, what if we've been staring at the manual this whole time and never tried to read it? Chapter 3. Did they hide a protocol in 6EQJ5? Let's imagine just for a moment that the universe isn't subtle, that if someone out there wanted to say hello, they wouldn't send poetry. They'd send something any engineering-minded species could recognize, a protocol. When you download a file, your device doesn't just hope it arrived intact, it checks. It uses checksums, numbers that confirm whether the data is complete or corrupted. When 2 computers connect, they don't immediately share their deepest secrets. They first agree on how to talk. What format? How long? What encoding? If you look at the wow signal through that lens, those 6 characters start to look different. We know from the instrument side that 6EQJ5 was just Big Ear's way of saying the signal rose to about 6 times the noise, then 14, then 26, peaked around 30, fell to 19, then dropped back to 5. But numbers don't care where they come from. They can sit in 2 stories at once, a cautious scientific one and a speculative one that asks, what if? Take those characters and treat them as a sequence in base 36, where 0, 9 are digits, AZ are 10 to 35, 6 to 6, E to 14, Q to 26, U to 30, J to 19, 5 to 5. Add them up, 6 plus 14 plus 26 plus 30 plus 19 plus 5 equals 100. On its own, that's a neat, clean number. But then imagine you notice something else in the data. Immediately after the signal ended, the system registered a short pattern, 8 bits, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, a binary string, which is 100 in decimal. In ordinary computing, pairing a number with its binary twin is exactly the kind of thing you do to verify a transmission. Here's a set of values. Their sum is 100. Here is 100 again, encoded differently. If they match on your end, you know the data survived the trip. Seen through that lens, the wow signal stops looking like a single weird spike and starts looking like the opening act of a conversation. A short burst at the hydrogen line, the meet here frequency, a sequence of values that sum to 100. A binary echo of that same total, like a digital handshake. It's as if someone somewhere said, before we teach you words, we teach you how to check if the words arrived. Then there's the center of that sequence, the character U. In our alphabet, U is the 21st letter. The wow signal was detected near the 21-centimeter hydrogen line. From the strict scientific view, that's coincidence layered on coincidence. Our human alphabet mapping onto our human logging system, sitting on top of a natural frequency. But from the protocol story view, feels almost like a signature. We are speaking at 21 centimeters. We peak at the 21st position in your character set. This is deliberate. Zoom out further. The signal lasted about 72 seconds, 6 intensity samples. Suppose you are a civilization who wants to tell newcomers how to respond. Length of transmission, 72 seconds. Number of blocks, 6. Encoding, values that can be interpreted in a positional system, like base 36. Verification, sum of values, followed by a checksum. You're not sending a full encyclopedia. You're sending instructions. When you reply, use 6 blocks. Use this many seconds. Use this kind of encoding. Attach a checksum so we know you understand. Now tilt the lens again. When people stared harder at the pattern, they claimed to see more. Ratios between the peaks that brush against the golden ratio. The same strange number that shapes spirals in galaxies and shells. Values that, if matched to nearby star systems in light years, seem to highlight a handful of interesting neighbors. Even playful analogies to the code of life itself, as if the signal was whispering, "We are built from chemistry like you. We are not ghosts. We are bodies." Is any of this scientifically confirmed? No. If you walk into a professional observatory and say, 6EQUJ5 secretly encodes a checksum, a star map, and amino acids, you will get polite smiles at best. But remember the frame we're in tonight. We are not writing a paper. We are exploring a story where the most famous unexplained signal in SETI history wasn't just a random flare, but the first page of a user manual that says, "Here is how to prove our message is real. Here is how to answer. Here is how to tell us you are ready to talk." And if you accept that frame, even for a moment, a more unsettling question appears at the edge of the screen. If this really was a protocol, why didn't we respond? Was it because we didn't understand? Because we were too busy arguing about comets and interference? Or was it because, at some level, we understood exactly enough to realize that answering might be the most dangerous thing a young civilization could do? In a quiet universe, a single whisper can be an invitation. In a dark forest, a single whisper can be bait. In the next chapter, we'll step out of the numbers and into that forest. We'll talk about the unsettling idea that maybe, just maybe, the reason we chose silence is that we're not as foolish as we look. Chapter 4. The email we never answered. Imagine this for a moment. You're sitting at your computer late at night. You hear the soft chime of a new message. You open your inbox, and there it is. No sender you recognize, no profile picture, just a subject line that feels heavy in a way you can't explain. "We see you." Inside, instead of a long wall of text, you find something else. A short paragraph explaining how to check that the email is genuine. A small block of code that, when you run it, verifies itself perfectly. A few coordinates that seem to point to places on the globe. A final line. Reply using this format to this address within this window of time. You don't understand every detail. You're not even sure how they got your address. But you know one thing. This is not spam. The wow signal, if you treat it as a protocol instead of a spike of noise, starts to look like that kind of message. Not a declaration, not a speech, a test. Here's a way to prove this isn't random. Here's how to reply if you pass. The frequency chosen, near the hydrogen line. The timing, just long enough to fill the telescope's field of view. The structure, values that can be interpreted as more than just intensities if you choose to. Whether or not that was truly the intent, that's the story we're exploring tonight. So let's ask the question directly. If this was our cosmic email, why didn't we answer? The simple, surface-level story is easy. Scientists argued. Was it a comet? A rare natural flare? A glitch? Was it interference from Earth? Different papers suggested different explanations. Some were later challenged, some remain possible. No one could say with total confidence, yes, this was a message. So the official conclusion became a kind of shrug. We don't have enough data. It never repeated. We'll keep listening. Case closed. But underneath that polite uncertainty, another layer exists. A layer that doesn't show up in press releases, but whispers through late-night conversations and science fiction. What if the problem was not, can we reply? But should we? Because technically we could. We know the patch of sky it came from, even if not the exact star. We know the frequency, around 1420 MHz. We know the rough duration, around 2 seconds. It would take coordination, equipment, and permission, but it's not impossible. So the real question becomes, what does it mean to talk back to the unknown? When you answer an email from a stranger, you at least know what an email is, what a network is, what a human is. When you answer a signal from the direction of Sagittarius, you don't know who's listening. You don't know who else can hear your reply. You don't know the rules of the game you just agreed to play. It's tempting to romanticize the idea of answering, to imagine a moment where we beam out a carefully crafted message, mathematics, chemistry, a map of our solar system, greetings from Earth. But there's another way to look at it. If you open your curtains at night and see a flashlight blink in the distance, you have two instincts. Wave your own light back in excitement, or freeze and think, who is that and who else is watching? For most of human history, caution has kept our species alive. When you heard a noise in the dark, you didn't shout your name. You stayed quiet. You watched. You tried to understand before you revealed yourself. The wow signal dropped us into that ancient pattern on a cosmic scale. On the surface, we had debates about hydrogen emission and comets. We argued about probabilities and instruments. Was it artificial? Was it natural? But beneath those arguments sits a simpler, more primal calculation. We don't know who they are. We don't know how powerful they are. We don't know if they are kind, indifferent, or territorial. And we are fragile. We are a young civilization, still learning to handle our own technology without tripping over it. We have just learned to put machines into orbit and send probes to nearby planets. We can hurt each other very effectively. We cannot yet protect ourselves from an object the size of a city rocketing in from deep space. So what does it mean to invite attention in a universe we don't control? Maybe the reason we haven't replied is not stupidity or negligence or a lack of curiosity. Maybe it's because, at some hazy, instinctive level, we grasp something uncomfortable. If the wow signal really was a message, then someone out there is ahead of us, at least far enough ahead to broadcast across interstellar distances with ease. And answering them is not like replying to a text. It's like standing in a dark forest, hearing a rustle, and having to decide whether you whisper back, knowing that you might not be the only one who hears. In recent years, a particular metaphor has been quietly haunting these discussions, a way of thinking about the cosmos that turns it from a friendly, open field into something much more tense. It's called the dark forest. And once you walk into that idea, the silence after the wow signal stops looking cowardly and starts looking like the first rational decision our species has ever made on a cosmic scale. Chapter 5. The Dark Forest Problem. Picture a forest at night. No streetlights, no paths, no moon, just trees, shadows, and the occasional snap of a twig. You are not alone there. You can't see them, but you know other hunters exist. Some are cautious. Some are desperate. Some are predators. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they want. You don't know what they're capable of. In that kind of forest, what is the safest strategy? Do you light a torch, call out your name, and announce your location? Or do you move quietly, hiding your presence, listening more than speaking? This is the heart of the dark forest idea, originally explored in fiction, but unsettling enough that it has seeped into serious conversations about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The logic goes like this. The universe is vast, and resources are finite. Any civilization that can expand might want or need more resources. You can never be sure of another civilization's intentions. You can't know their true technological level. Once two civilizations know about each other, there's a risk that one will decide to eliminate the other preemptively. In a situation like that, silence becomes survival. You don't broadcast your location loudly across the galaxy. You don't assume strangers are friendly. You don't give anyone a precise map to where your home is, unless you are certain You can handle whatever comes next. You hide. You listen. You grow stronger in the shadows. And if you do decide to speak, you do it very carefully. Now blend that with our situation. For a century or so, we've been quietly leaking radio and television waves into space. Our planet has a soft radio glow, a byproduct of our technology. It's like the faint sound of a village at night. Music, talk shows, radar pings, unintentional chatter. Nearby stars, if they have sensitive enough ears, could already suspect that something noisy is happening here. But there's a difference between accidental leakage and a deliberate, focused reply to a one-time message at a special frequency. One is like laughter, drifting through walls. The other is like knocking on a stranger's door and saying, "Yes, we heard you. Here is exactly where we are." The dark forest theory doesn't say that every civilization is malicious. It doesn't need that. It only needs this. Some civilizations might be cautious to the point of paranoia. Some might reason that any unknown intelligence is a potential long-term threat. Some might choose to remove potential threats before they grow. In that environment, a single act of broadcasting is not a neutral gesture. It's a move in a game where you don't know the rules, the players, or the stakes. So now, place the wow signal into this forest, a narrow-band whisper near the hydrogen line. 72 seconds long, never repeated. If it was intentional, several possibilities emerge. It was a mistake. It was a test. It was sent by someone who either doesn't believe in the dark forest or someone who doesn't fear it. We'll come back to them. For the moment, stay with us here on Earth. We live in a world where we struggle to manage climate, energy, and our own weapons. We are not yet what some thinkers call a planetary civilization. We are early. We are fragile. We are still learning how to keep our own house from catching fire. In that context, what does the dark forest suggest? It suggests that, until we know more, until we are stronger, the safest default might be, listen, study, do not shout, which means that the silence after the wow signal, the absence of any official reply, might not be an accident. It might be a quiet, unspoken policy. Until we understand who else is in the forest and how powerful they are, we do not announce ourselves on purpose. Of course, not everyone agrees with this. Some argue that if advanced civilizations exist, they are likely wise and cooperative, that any species that survives long enough to reach the stars must have outgrown aggression. Others point out that intelligence does not guarantee kindness, that evolution does not promise morality, that the universe may contain gardeners, traders, explorers, and hunters. In such a universe, the wow signal becomes more than a curiosity. It becomes a temptation. To reply is to step out from behind the tree and wave. To stay silent is to remain one more shadow among many. The unsettling part is this: we don't have enough information to know which choice is correct. We only know one thing with certainty. We are not yet in a position to enforce the consequences of our choice on anyone but ourselves. We are not the apex predator in this forest. We are, at best, a young species that has just learned fire and radio and is peeking between the branches, trying to decide whether the glint in the distance is a friend's torch or the eyes of something very patient. So when people ask, why didn't we answer the wow signal? One possible answer is, because in a dark forest, you don't shout back at the first whisper you hear. But there's another question we haven't touched yet. If the dark forest is real, if broadcasting is dangerous, then what kind of being ignores that rule and sends a message anyway? Who dares to shout in the dark, knowing anyone might be listening? Chapter 6. Who dares to scream in a dark forest? Let's flip the perspective. So far, we've been looking at this from our side. Small, fragile, uncertain, cautious. Now, for a moment, step into the hypothetical position of whoever or whatever might have sent a signal like the WOW event, if it was intentional. You live in that same cosmic forest. You have the same basic facts. The universe is vast. Other intelligences may exist. You don't know their intentions. You don't know their power, and yet you decide to speak. Not softly, not accidentally, but by picking a special frequency and sending a clear, narrow-band tone that any watcher at that channel would notice. What does that say about you? There are a few different archetypes we can imagine. Call them stories, masks, or thought experiments. They help us think about the kind of mind that would break the dark forest rule and shout anyway. 1. The gardener. In the first story, the sender is not just another camper in the forest. They planted the forest. They shaped the conditions for life in regions of the galaxy. They tuned planets, adjusted orbits, seeded chemistry. Maybe they nudged young species like ours into existence, then stepped back to watch. In that role, sending a message is not risky. It's maintenance, checking in on the garden. If they had a hand in shaping worlds, they might not fear anything that evolved on those worlds. Stories across cultures whisper about this kind of figure, beings who come from the sky, teach, adjust, judge, then disappear. Some people press that role onto names like the Anunnaki, ancient gods, who arrive, intervene, and depart. In a gardener frame, a signal near the hydrogen line could be less a shout and more a gentle knock. We know this frequency means something to you now. We left you in the cradle. We're just checking if you're awake. Confidence, in this case, doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from authorship. You're not afraid of something you planted. 2. The apex. In the second story, the sender is not a caretaker. They are simply unafraid. Maybe they are far older than us. Maybe they have turned entire star systems into energy harvesters, built structures that wrap around suns, learned to move between stars the way we move between cities. From their perspective, the dark forest exists for others. They are the thing in the forest other beings worry about. When you have that level of power, sending a beacon is not risky. It is a statement, we are here. We do not hide. We do not expect to be challenged. Confidence, in this frame, is a side effect of capability. If such a civilization exists, it doesn't have to be hostile. It could be indifferent, curious, or even protective. But the unsettling part is this. If they did decide they didn't like what they saw, there is very little a young species like ours could do about it. 3. The naive neighbor. In the third story, the sender is neither a gardener nor an apex power. They are more like us, excited, curious, new to the idea that the sky might answer. Imagine a civilization that has just learned to build radio telescopes, just like we did a century ago. They point their dishes at interesting places and send out hopeful signals. Is anyone there? They don't think in terms of dark forests and preemptive strikes. They think in terms of greetings and contact and cosmic neighbors. In a way, they resemble characters from animated stories we tell ourselves. Creatures clever enough to build gadgets, but impulsive enough to stumble into danger through their own enthusiasm. Smart enough to create, not always wise enough to survive their own experiments. In this frame, the wow signal is less a calculated move and more an act of cosmic optimism. We're here. We hope someone friendly hears us. The risk, of course, is that in a real dark forest, optimism can be fatal. 4. The bait. There is a fourth story, the darkest of all. In this version, the sender is playing a different game. They are not trying to talk to us. They are trying to find us. They send simple, tempting messages into potentially habitable regions of the galaxy. A short burst here, a neat, intriguing pattern there. Then they wait to see who answers. Any civilization that replies is by definition technologically active, located precisely enough to target, willing to reveal itself. In that story, the first message is not a greeting. It is a net. We don't know which, if any, of these masks, gardener, apex, naive neighbor, or beta, might describe reality. We don't know if anyone sent the wow signal at all. But thinking through these possibilities does something important. It forces us to see that who speaks changes everything about what a reply means. Answering a gardener might be like talking to a distant ancestor. Answering an apex might be like calling the largest empire in history and saying, "Hi, we're small and unarmed." Answering a naive neighbor might be the beginning of a friendship or an invitation to share risks neither of us understands. Answering a bait, well, in all of these scenarios, one thing remains constant. We don't know which role is real. We don't know where, on the scale of power and energy, we stand relative to whoever might be out there. We don't even have a shared language to describe levels of cosmic power yet. Just early attempts, rough yardsticks for what a civilization might look like when it controls not just a planet, but a star, or more. In the next chapter, we'll talk about one of those yardsticks, a way of rating how advanced a civilization is by how much energy it can harness. Because before we can judge whether our silence was fear or wisdom, we have to admit something humbling. We are very likely not at the top of anything. Chapter 7. The Scale of Civilizations. Before we decide whether our silence was fear or wisdom, we need a way to talk about power, not the political kind, the cosmic kind. Imagine rating civilizations, not by how tall their buildings are, but by how much energy they can command. There's a simple idea some thinkers use for this, a rough ladder called the Kardashev-scale. It's not perfect, but it gives us a language. On this ladder, a civilization's level isn't about how clever its art is or how poetic its stories are. It's about how deeply it has reached into the machinery of nature itself. Type 1 is the first real step. A Type 1 civilization can harness essentially all the energy of its home planet, not just a few dams, some oil, and a scattering of solar panels, but the full power available in winds, oceans, solar radiation, geothermal heat. On a Type 1 world, energy is no longer a constant crisis. The planet's systems are understood and managed. Weather, climate, and resource flows are not perfect, but they are not mysterious. We are not there. Right now, we are something like type point something. We still fight over fuel. We still argue about how our own climate works. We still design systems that we don't fully know how to turn off. We are clever, yes. We are creative, absolutely. But in Kardashev terms, we are still a young species trying to figure out how not to trip over the power cords we just discovered. Type 2 lives on a different scale. A Type 2 civilization isn't limited to its planet. It can tap the full energy of its star. People often visualize this as a Dyson sphere or swarm, vast structures in space that intercept and use the light that would otherwise stream into the void. For a Type 2 species, its home star isn't just a distant light in the sky, it is a machine, a controlled furnace, a tamed dragon. At that level, the energy budget is so enormous that things which look impossible to us, moving planets, building megastructures, sending fleets of probes to other stars, become feasible projects instead of fantasy. Type 3 steps beyond even that. A Type 3 civilization can use the energy of an entire galaxy, billions of stars, countless worlds, streams of radiation and matter flowing through spiral arms and central black holes. At that scale, a single planet is less a home and more a cell in a body. The civilization's territory is measured in thousands of light years. Whether such civilizations exist is an open question. Maybe they're rare. Maybe they flare up and vanish. Maybe they're out there, and we simply don't recognize their signatures yet. But the latter itself gives us a useful contrast. When you look at Earth from that perspective, a few things become clear. We are not in a position to dictate terms to anyone beyond our orbit. We cannot yet deflect every asteroid, calm every storm, or heal every wound we inflict on our own ecosystems. We argue about whether we can keep our own atmosphere stable. If we ever meet beings who are truly Type 2 or Type 3, the power gap would be immense. It would be like a village discovering that continents exist, and that some of them have already built global networks, fleets, and systems that dwarf anything the village can imagine. Now, bring this back into the dark forest. If you are a Type 0 point something species in a potentially dangerous cosmos, the rational play is caution. You do not yet know how common life is. You do not know if anyone out there takes preemptive action. You certainly do not know how much energy they can wield. In that situation, answering a mysterious signal is not romantic. It is a strategic decision made from a position of radical weakness. On the other side of the equation, if someone sends a clear, narrow-band signal across interstellar distances, what does that imply about them? If they are a Type 1 species, like we hope to be someday, then they might be acting out of curiosity or optimism. They could be our peers in spirit, excited children yelling across a playground they don't realize is built over something deeper. If they are Type 2 or Type 3, the story changes. A civilization that can command a star's energy does not have much to fear from a pre-Type 1 species. From their perspective, we might look like we look at fireflies, beautiful, fragile, and not particularly dangerous. For them, sending a beacon is not risky. It's almost generous. The unsettling part is that we can't tell which of these we're dealing with, or if we're dealing with anyone at all. So when we stand here on our little world, holding our tiny place on the Kardashev ladder, and we look up at the direction the wow signal came from, we are forced into a rare moment of honesty. We are very small. We are very early. We do not know the rules of the larger game. And in that situation, choosing not to answer is not a failure of courage. It may be the first time in a long history of impulsive species-level decisions that we quietly do the cautious, strategic thing. The debates on paper, comet versus signal, natural versus artificial, may be sincere, but even if they are, they sit on top of a deeper truth. If the wow signal truly came from minds far older and more powerful than ours, then replying is not something you do just because you are curious. You do it only if you are prepared to live in the kind of universe where someone can hear you and reach you. For now, we are not that prepared, but while scientists and strategists argue, everyone else does something very human. They speculate, they tell stories, they write comments, and if you scroll long enough under any discussion of the wow signal, you start to see patterns in how we, as a species, try to explain what happened and what didn't. Chapter 8. Did someone answer for us? There is a story that has taken root in our collective imagination, told first in books and then on screens. In that story, a scientist on a troubled world receives a message from the stars. It is not vague. It is not ambiguous. It is clear proof that another civilization exists. She stands at a crossroads. Her leaders are divided. Her world is fractured. Her own life is heavy with grief and disappointment. And in that moment, she makes a choice alone. She answers. She sends a reply that says, in effect, we can hear you. We are here. Come. In the three-body problem, that reply does not bring a gentle exchange of ideas. It brings a slow, methodical, almost inevitable approach of a civilization that has had much longer to think, to plan, and to fear. The danger in that story is not the first message. The danger is the reply. Answering transforms a distant curiosity into a relationship. And relationships across that kind of power gap are rarely equal. Now return to our world. We do not have a decoded manifesto from Sagittarius. We have the wow signal, 72 seconds of narrowband radio near the hydrogen line, never seen again. Officially, we did not reply. We classified it as interesting and unexplained, built better instruments and kept listening. But once you know the dark forest idea, and once you've seen what happens in stories, where someone answers too quickly, a different possibility starts to whisper. What if the surface story is not the only one? What if somewhere far from public view, decisions about messaging the cosmos are being made more carefully than we think? Imagine a small group of people with access to large radio dishes, to powerful transmitters, to the quiet channels used to talk to deep space probes. Imagine they watched the debates about the wow signal and reached a different conclusion than the public one. Not, this is nothing, but this might be something, and we need to control how we answer. A response, if it was ever sent, would not be a casual experiment. It would be encrypted in budgets, disguised as routine calibration, hidden in the long schedules of deep space communication. A short transmission timed for when our planet's rotation brought that same region of Sagittarius into view. A narrow whisper back at 1420 megahertz, structured carefully, sent once, then buried. If that happened, we would not expect to see consequences immediately. Stars are far apart. Even light takes years to cross the gaps between them. A message could take decades. to arrive. A reply could take decades more. By the time any physical sign of contact reached us, the people who pushed the button might already be gone. So when unusual objects drift through our system, elongated visitors from interstellar space, strange trajectories, subtle accelerations that don't quite match what we expect, our scientific mind reaches for comets, fragments of rock and ice, natural wanderers from other systems. Our storytelling mind, the one that listens to late-night theories and reads science fiction, plays another possibility in the background. What if these are not just rocks? What if they are instruments, scouts, probes following up on a conversation we don't remember starting? There is no solid evidence that the wow signal was answered. There is no public record of any official reply. But the very fact that we can imagine secret answers, hidden transmissions, and slow-moving consequences tells us something about where we are as a species. We are aware enough to be tempted, afraid enough to hesitate, divided enough that some of us dream of contact, while others dread it. The safer assumption, the one most scientists make, is simple. We never replied. We logged the signal, we argued over it, and we chose caution. That may sound disappointing if you're hungry for cosmic drama, but consider what it means that, for once, we might have erred on the side of restraint. In a universe where we don't know who else is listening, how powerful they are, or how they respond to unknown voices, choosing not to answer might be the most responsible decision we've ever made together, even if we never held a vote. And that brings us to the heart of this story, to the conclusion that quietly waits. Behind all the what-ifs and maybes and theories, if the wow signal was a message, and if we truly did stay silent, what does that say about who we are and who we are becoming? Chapter 9. Silence as humanity's first rational choice. It's easy to frame the wow signal as a missed opportunity. The story almost tells itself. We had our first contact. We didn't recognize it. We argued it to death. We let the moment slip through our fingers. It's a dramatic, tragic way to see it. But there is another way, a quieter, less cinematic way. That might actually be closer to the truth. We heard something strange in the dark, and for once, we did not rush to shout our name. Think about our track record as a species. We charge into unknown territories. We sail across oceans in fragile boats. We light fires without fully understanding what will happen to the forests around us. We split the atom before we fully grasped how close we were to erasing cities. We build systems, financial, digital, ecological, that we do not fully understand, then act surprised when they shake. Impulsiveness is one of our oldest habits. And yet, when faced with a mysterious 72-second whisper from the direction of Sagittarius, we did something unusual. We hesitated. Why? Because when you layer everything we've explored, the dark forest idea, the vast gaps on the Kardashev-scale, our own pre-type 1 fragility, one truth becomes hard to ignore. We are not ready for a conversation with something that might be centuries or millennia ahead of us. We are not even sure we can manage our own tools without hurting ourselves. We stand at a strange point in our history, advanced enough to listen to the sky, not advanced enough to guarantee we can survive whatever hears us. In that situation, silence is not cowardice. Silence is strategy. If the WOW signal was a comet, a quirk of hydrogen and motion, then our caution cost us nothing. We stayed quiet in response to a natural event that never knew we existed. If the WOW signal was a message, a real, intentional broadcast from another mind, then our silence was a statement too. It said, "We are here. We can hear something, but we do not yet know. Who else is in the forest? We will wait." Waiting is not glamorous. It doesn't make for triumphant speeches. It doesn't satisfy the part of us that wants to throw open the door and embrace whatever is on the other side. But sometimes, waiting is what keeps stories from ending too early. Someday, we may reach a point where we can reasonably call ourselves Type 1 a civilization that has learned to stabilize its own home without constantly lighting new fires. Someday, we may learn to protect our planet from rocks and flares and the side effects of our own inventions. Someday, we may be able to face the possibility of others, not as frightened children, but as cautious adults. On that day, if a signal like the WOW event arrives, we may be in a much better position to decide whether to answer and what to say. Until then, we live in an in-between. We build bigger ears. We refine our instruments. We tell stories at midnight about what might be out there and about the messages we might already have missed. And in a way, those stories are also a kind of preparation. They force us to ask hard questions now, before the universe forces us to answer them for real. If you've stayed with this story to the end, some unreasonable hour of the night, you are already part of that quiet preparation. You are one of the people willing to sit with the idea that we might not be alone. We might not be ready. And those two truths can both be real at the same time. Maybe one day we will decide to send a reply, not from a position of fear or desperation, but from strength and understanding. Until then, our best message might be this: we are listening, we are learning, we are trying to grow into a civilization that deserves to speak for its world. For now, the only signals we can safely send are the small ones: a light in a window, a shared story, a late-night comment, a quiet decision to keep thinking about the future, even when it feels far away. So if you're still awake, do your little ritual for this age of algorithms and antennas. Leave a trace that says you were here. A like, a subscribe, a note about where you're listening from, and what time it is on your side of the planet. Because long before we decide whether to talk to the galaxy, we have to learn how to talk to each other, honestly and carefully in the dark.